Hello, how's it going guys? My name's Tom Mason and welcome to my workshop on local wildlife photography for WEX. Now today we're going to be exploring the local area around home and talking about the possibilities for shooting images of wildlife right on the doorstep. It's certainly one of the places that for me as a professional wildlife photographer I really hold closest in my heart. It's a location for trying new things, experimenting, but also just working on long-term projects that really can yield some fantastic images, and that's why I'm really so excited to talk about it. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tom Mason. I'm a professional wildlife and nature photographer, a Nikon Europe optics ambassador. I've been a professional wildlife photographer since I was 20 years old. I picked up a camera when I was 12 years old, and I have literally been shooting wildlife ever since. Absolutely fell in love with it. I just never want to put my camera down. I love it to bits. It's so much fun. And if you're just starting out in wildlife photography, you really have such a huge amount of enjoyment coming your way because it is such a fun thing to get out and do, to enjoy the great outdoors, to see some wonderful creatures and to have some incredible moments that will stay with you for absolutely ever. Over the last couple of years, working on various assignments, I've had some amazing opportunities to photograph different wildlife. Everything from jaguars in the Amazon rainforest to penguins in the Falkland Isles. It's been a really incredible ride for me, for sure. So many different incredible moments with wildlife and things that I definitely won't forget. Now, when it comes to my shooting style and what I really love to produce, a lot of it really is all about environmental portraiture. I love close-up shots, but for me, the images that really fulfill me with enjoyment are those that put an animal in its context, that show you more than just the subject on its own. I really want a little bit of that environment, that habitat, that, just area that really makes a subject special. And so that's often what I'm looking for within my images. And we'll talk about that today as we go on. Working in a variety of different areas. I've experimented with all sorts of techniques, be it wide angle cameras, remote cameras, using more compression with long lenses, but also expanding out to panoramic images, a lot of different stuff to make these sorts of shots. And for myself as a photographer, one thing that I always really find that I love to do is constantly experiment and develop the shots and images that I'm producing, just kind of bringing in new techniques all the time. And that's why, working close to home is a real fantastic place to do that. It's an area where you can try things out, you can experiment, and to be honest, it doesn't matter too much if you fluff up. And that's why for anyone who's starting their wildlife photography or really wants to improve, finding a project that you can really sink your teeth into right on the doorstep is absolutely key. And I really, really believe that. And the most important factors in all of that is time. When we have time as photographers, it means that we can, come back to a location over and over again. We can try a shot over and over again. We can wait for the light to be right. We can wait for the rain, the snow, all of that stuff to come together for those perfect images. And that's something that a lot of the time as professional photographers, we don't always have. If I'm going on a trip and I've only got a week or 2 weeks to shoot some images for a client, I really have to make the most of any situation that comes up in front of me. Sometimes I have a huge amount of time to work with, to really wait for that perfect shot. But a lot of the time we have to compromise and really work with the techniques that we've learned over the years to pull some images in these tight time frames. But in order to experiment and grow as a photographer, having the ability to really just have a huge amount of time to work on a project really is a fantastic place to be. And of course, over the last year, being locked down close to home, I've had just that. So I've been out photographing the hares, working on remote cameras close to home, just having a huge amount of fun with my local wildlife. And I think especially when that fun comes in, you really start to produce images that you're super, super stoked about. And so hopefully I will show you some of those today and take you out shooting on a variety of different little spots and show you some of the images that I've been making. But firstly, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the basic equipment for wildlife photographers. If you're just getting started, you want to know some of the basics and the gear that I use, we're going to talk about that now. It's only a quick overview and I'll be talking about gear, settings, everything like that throughout this whole hour workshop. So don't worry about that. But what we're going to do is jump into the kit bag. I'm going to show you what I use. Right then, so to get started, I just wanted to take a quick look at some of the gear that I use all the time as a wildlife photographer. Now, the first piece of kit is that of my binoculars. These are absolutely essential for me, for finding subjects, for spotting them ahead of time, for scouting out locations, looking for where I might find, the wildlife I need to photograph. They are absolutely key. They mean that when I'm staking stuff out for long periods of time, I don't get any eye fatigue because they give really nice field of view, wonderful feel and just comfortable viewing experience. They're absolutely essential. These are my Nikon Monarch HGs. These are the 8x30s. These are my compact, go everywhere pair of binoculars. They're around my neck, in my bag, in the glove compartment, wherever I go. Absolutely essential, and every wildlife photographer should have a really good pair of binoculars with them at all times. Now, as it's on the top, the next thing is my tripod. Now, as a wildlife photographer, I'm using long lenses, so having a solid support for that is absolutely essential. This is my Jitso systematic tripod. Love the Jitso range, really solid while still being reasonably light. The carbon fiber structure is absolutely fantastic. And then at the top, I've got the brand new Series 4 ball head. It's a great compromise for me, giving me a great amount of smoothness and this controllable friction that means I can keep my long lens steady and hold it in position whilst also being able to move it at a moment's notice. It's absolutely great. One of the key things that you're looking for on any great wildlife photography tripod is the ability for it to go absolutely flat to the ground, and the systematic works absolutely great for that. Pair that with a really good tripod head, you've got an extremely sturdy support for working out in the field, and that low angle is absolutely key for us wildlife photographers. Now, next up, of course, is the bag. Even when I'm close to home, I still have to carry some heavy gear, and so having a good bag is key. This is my Jitso, my very dirty Jitso 30 litre Adventure. Use this all the time. It's a really good compromise between having enough space for a large lens and my cameras and stuff that I need for a day, as well as some extra personal gear that we're always taking about. Now, to open it up from the back, I'll kind of just show you what I carry on a kind of general day, if I can find a bit to open it. There we go. First up is my main camera and lens. Now, this is the new Nikon Z6 II alongside my trusty 300mm 2.8 VR. I've used this for years. I've had it since I was 18. And it's probably one of the best investments as a photographer I've ever made. The lens is incredibly sharp. It is superb. The autofocus speed is wonderful, and the images that come out of it are just absolutely beautiful. I love this lens because the speed is great. That aperture of 2.8 means it's fantastic for working in low light, for giving me wonderful background bokeh and lovely smoothness. And of course I can pair it with teleconverters. I've got the 1.4 on here to give me some extra reach if I need it, while still maintaining an f4 aperture that's great for shooting in all kinds of condition. It's relatively small for a super telephoto and optics of this quality, and compared to something like a 500 or a 600, it really is small and light and easy to hold out in the field. And for the style of shooting that I do, often I'm moving around or hand holding or traveling a lot of the time. It really does work well for me, and I absolutely love it, and it's not going anywhere out of my kit anytime soon. The Z6 II here, I'm using kitted up, but I also have my D850 as well. It's always good to have two cameras with you in case something goes wrong. The D850 is really my main stills camera. It is superb. The quality of the image that comes out of it with the 45 megapixel sensor, the build quality and durability is amazing. The machete mark down the back of mine is pretty testament to that. I've used it all over the places in the rainforest, stuff like that. It absolutely just keeps on working. And it's produced certainly some of my favourite all-time images that you can print massive and use for basically any commercial assignment. That's great. The Z6 II then, why have I also got it? Well, I love the fact that because you've got the reduced megapixel count with the 24 megapixels, you get a better ISO performance. So if I'm working with subjects in the evening, later in the day, badgers, or anything like that, it's going to give me better, cleaner, high ISO performance that's great. Of course, for myself, as someone who's producing video as well, being able to just switch with the one flick of a switch to shoot video and have higher quality video out of the Z system is absolutely fantastic. Again, is why it's also in the bag. And it also gives me access to a smaller camera that can be useful for certain shoots if I'm doing more photojournalist stuff, where I need to be smaller and lighter to keep something around. But it really is a great camera and I'm loving using it. Now, additionally, alongside the two cameras, I also carry a few extra bits. Of course, spare batteries. Got to have those, doesn't matter where you are, always have a spare. Of course, the D850 runs for about 2-3 weeks on one of these big batteries. It is amazing. But, you know, always have a spare. And then often I just carry like a wide angle. This is my 35mm S lens that goes with the Z6 II there. This lens is superb, it has a really natural feel to it, lovely image comes out of it. I really do love the 35mm focal length. Means that you just have less distortion, you know, all sorts of stuff. It just makes the images really pop. I also have a 35mm f mount as well that I use with the D850. And an 85mm, again, just another great lens for filling in the mid-ground. I really like this for landscapes, but also for low light shooting. That 1.8 aperture means that I can work right down into low light conditions. 85mm might seem miles away for people when it comes to wildlife photography, but if you're working with mammals that you can get really close to, you're working right in those last hours of the day. I've had some great images out of the 85mm. It's just a focal length that I really do enjoy shooting. Now, that's pretty much it for what I carry on a given day. If I'm out photographing hares or looking for a local subject, I won't carry too much gear because you don't want to be burdened down with it. And of course, at home, I've got my macro lens, a 24-70, a 20mm, 14mm, all sorts of different stuff. But it's all about picking what you need for any given assignment. One of the more important things to have, of course, is that extra and that personal gear. As wildlife photographers, we're out in the cold, in the rain, and all sorts of stuff, and so making sure you're ready for that is key. Having good outdoor equipment is something that often isn't covered, but if you're going to invest in your cameras and your lenses and everything like that, also think about picking up some good outdoor clothing, because if you're cold, you're wet, you're uncomfortable, you'll go home so much quicker, and that means you won't get any shots at all. So certainly something to think about. Got my kind of like insulating layer on at the moment, but when I'm crawling through the fields and stuff like that, I like to have my kind of like get it messy coat. This is my Paramo smock. It's really fantastic, drab green colour, great for wildlife. It's really rugged and durable. I've got no rips in it after like a year and a bit of use, and I crawl around all over the place in this, no problem whatsoever. Protects my gear, and it's like waterproof and everything like that. That's fantastic. So I use that all the time. I'll be wearing that a lot in this video. I have a waterproof cover for my camera and lens. Set up for the longest one. I can pull it over, get everything out of the water. Again, it's got this nice soft shell material, so as the rain hits it, doesn't make too much noise. That's fantastic. But again, keeps it safe if you're on a beach or in the rain, whatever. Protect your gear, something good to have. That's from Wildlife Watching Supplies. They sell them on the WEX website, you can pick them up. I've also got a head torch. Going out early in the mornings, coming back late at night, you want to be able to see where you're going, so I've got one of them. That's my Petzl head torch. Fantastic bit of kit, rechargeable batteries, fantastic. And finally, in my top this afternoon, my flask. You can see it's been battered and used, and that's because I take it out with me pretty much every single day. Having a hot drink with you, even in the summer, is just lovely. It's going to keep you focused, keep you out for longer periods of time, and the more time you spend looking for your wildlife and out on location, the better shots you're going to get. So always have one of these. A good reliable one like this, you're not going to spill it or anything. And that's another great thing about this Jitsu bag, is because the top is separated from the bottom and it's got this kind of like internal semi-waterproof kind of thing, just gives you a bit more protection to split up your gear. That's really nice. Now, covering that stuff there, you'll notice that it's quite a few bits of expensive equipment, but when you're getting started, you really don't need all this. When I got started, I only had a Nikon D40 and a 55 to 200mm lens, 6 megapixels at the time. Nowadays, a basic DSLR, something like a D3000 series or like a D5000 series, are fantastic cameras for getting out and shooting and can make wonderful images. I use them all the time in my camera traps and stuff like that, and know the images are absolutely spectacular. Pair that with something like a 70 to 300mm and you've got a really great scope for shooting. If you want to go something a little bit more advanced, the 200 to 500 is a great Nikon lens, or also looking on the second-hand market is a great way to do it. Of course, Wex Used is a great place to pick up your different cameras and lenses, and you can save a great deal of money by going for a second-hand camera. Get something a lot more kind of top end and flagship from a few years back. That's going to be wonderful for getting out and shooting, give great image quality, all of that, whilst a fraction of the price. So it's certainly worth a look. I was amazed to see that this, my 300 2.8, was available for about $2 and a bit grand the other day. I paid well more than that when I bought mine a good few years back, and it certainly is worth that sort of money. So it's definitely worth thinking about if you want to upgrade but not maybe shell out absolutely top dollar for all this stuff. The used market is a fantastic place to go as well. But that's about it for the gear. I just wanted to give it a quick cover. I'll talk more about stuff that I'm using as we go through. But if you've got any questions about things, you want some specifics, be sure to just ask me, after this, find me on Instagram, whatever. I'm more than happy to ask and answer individual persons' gear questions and stuff like that, and we'll be putting links in as well as we go along, so be sure to check those out. I think that'll do for gear for now. Right, so before we head off looking for wildlife in the fields around home, I want to talk to you about the garden. It's one of the places that for me really sums up what wildlife photography means to me. When people ask me what I think about wildlife photography, what it really means, it's not about finding rare subjects or looking for those close-up pictures of wildlife. It's far more about just looking for that unique angle, showing something that maybe we haven't seen before, or just interpreting the world in a little bit of a different way. Not always going for those clean, simple portraits, but trying for something a little bit different. Now, the garden has always been a great place to experiment and try with that. It's a place that you can spend a lot of time photographing subjects over and over again. And even though the subjects that we have here, be it frogs, birds, flowers and macro projects, we've seen 1,000 times before, it's a great challenge that if you can create something a little bit different here, well, then you're going to have no problems whatsoever shooting it out in the wider field. Now, over the years, I've shot loads of projects at home in the garden. One of my first ones that I ever got published was all about foxes. Multiple different gardens helped me get the images together, using the odd wheelbarrow in the right place to create the aesthetic that I was looking for. It was a project that took a long time to build the images together, but those garden shots have sold many times for me over and over again. I'm often asked for tips about becoming a professional wildlife photographer, and one of the big ones I can give is always looking for those stories and those very kind of obvious human connection shots they're always looking for. Houses in the background, more urban locations, people in the background, these sort of things conservation organisations are always looking for within the images, because do you know what? Those straight up portraits of animals, there's thousands of them about. Everybody's producing them, and so you need to look for something a little bit different to really kind of mark your work out and have the ability to sell it if you want to, commercially gain from it. Of course, we all want to shoot those nice portraits as well, and there are certainly some things that we'll be talking about in a bit. But it's a good thing to get into the practice of looking for something a little bit unique and trying something new. Now, in the lockdown, I was photographing butterflies using a wide angle. I don't really tend to use my macro lens that much, but the wide angle I find much more enjoyable to use for that contextual approach. The pond was also something that was great fun to work with. I built my own homebrew underwater housing. This is it here. Basically, it's just a pelican case that I drilled a hole in the front, stuck a GoPro dome port on, and then siliconed it in so that it was fully waterproof, and I could put my camera here and submerge it in the water. Over a few days in the pond, following the frogs around, I had a great opportunity to get half and half shots, looking over and under the water with a frog in the middle. Stuff that took multiple hours of me kneeling on the side to get the image, but that unique and a little bit different angle has been really nice to have. Great for my portfolio, and ones that I've actually already sold to multiple clients, showing that, even right at home in the garden, you can produce that commercial photography if you're thinking about it in a little bit of a different way. Now, of course, it doesn't matter if you've got a large garden, small garden, even, just a balcony. You can create something interesting. A great little project that anyone can get started with is garden birds. I'm not going to talk about it today because there's a great video by Ellie Rothney on the Wex photo site that you can go and look at. She's got a load of techniques for photographing them in the garden, talking about hide setups and everything. Really good and worth checking out after this video. A great little project that you can do right at home. And if you can interpret stuff in the garden, make images that are a little bit different, you could be already so much further on your way to creating that really cool and interesting wildlife photography that I know many of us are looking to create. But with that in mind now, I'm going to leave the garden. I'm going to head out for one of my favourite subjects, the brown hare, and talk to you about, over the last year, how I've been looking to try and get something a little bit more unique for myself. So this afternoon, I've come out looking for hares, one of my favourite subjects to photograph around Hertfordshire, and I know these fields really well. I've shot them for years. Now the thing is, when it comes to wildlife photography, and especially setting up for local wildlife photography projects, you've got to get as much information as you can about the locations you're going to visit. Get out and scout them. Grab a pair of binoculars, go out and look at the areas you want to photograph. You need to study them and work out where your subjects will appear, the different locations they tend to be found in, but also think photographically about what you're looking at. It might be the length of the vegetation that will give you a certain sort of background and foreground for the image you want. You need to think about the wind direction. Today it's coming straight on my back. That means that this field in front of me is going to be absolutely useless to photograph hares. They're going to smell me miles away and they'll be straight off into the horizon. Whereas it is a good field on other days when I want to shoot backlit shots. The light tends to track round and drop off over there. That means if I'm in a position here low on the ground and the hares are in front of me, I can illuminate them from behind, get some nice backlit images that can work really, really well. You've got to think of these different things when you're gaining information about your local area. Just kind of record it. I have notebooks and documents on the computer. Oftentimes I might even drop a pin using my GPS watch or my phone to tell me about locations if I find somewhere new. And the more information you gather about your subjects, the locations, you're going to be far more consistent in creating images. For me, using a 300mm lens and a 1.4 teleconverter, I've got to get rather close. So this spot certainly isn't going to work today. But because I know these areas and I've got quite a few different locations, I'm going to go to my second point. It's off a few fields that way, and hopefully it might be a better location for this evening's photography. Right, so I've chosen to go the long way round to my location for hares this evening. Because of that wind direction, I need to make sure that I kind of circle around the back of it and come to my location so the wind's coming towards me and not from behind me. If I go to it the other way and the wind's over my shoulder, it gets out in front of me, all the hares that are in those fields, well, they're going to be long gone. Any chance of getting close to them, or maybe even the fallow deer in this area, is going to be completely out the window. So it's absolutely key that I'm working round the wind to get myself in position. It's a good chance as well to take a look at some other locations. I've seen quite a lot of deer poo as I've come along the track. That probably means the fallow deer are in this area. It'd be lovely to get a few shots of those over the next few days. But just looking at the land and working out different areas can also give you some good ideas for possible shots. I really like this field in front of me. It bows out nicely with a big sky behind it. Could be a good location to put a hare really small with just clouds or sky behind. A possible black and white picture as well. I've shot that sort of style before. The more you think about your subjects as you're walking around and working on a local project, the more likely you are to build a wider breadth of images and make some really interesting and cool pictures. But right, as it's time's ticking on, I better get cracking and get myself into position. So as I'm heading towards the hares, I thought it'd just be a good chance to tackle one of the subjects I get asked a lot. And that's, Tom, how do you get access to private land? You know, with hares, fallow deer, stuff like that, being a lot of the time on private arable fields, you need to seek permission to be able to get out here and photograph them. A lot of the time, it really just boils down to phoning up or emailing the local landowner, asking if you can have permission to come onto the fields. Often I include a map of the locations I'd like to go and promise some prints and a crate of beer to say thank you. You'd be surprised how a little bit of friendship goes a long way, and soon if you meet people in the local area, you'll have a variety of locations you can shoot. I've been invited to so many people's back gardens to take pictures, fields and different areas to go and shoot. People who've told me they've got private woodlands with badger sets and stuff like that. All of these knowledge and kind of community that you build up are really important if you want a good deal and, you know, scope of locations to get out and shoot. Of course, with a lot of local nature reserves having restrictions and often being busy with lots of other people, these areas that are your kind of own areas to get out and shoot, they really help extend the scope of what's possible and give you opportunities to make some really interesting images. Certainly for the styles of shot that I'll be showing you later on that aren't really possible in public areas. I'm just coming up and sneaking through the hedge onto the field where my location is. I'm now in a much better position because the wind is coming straight towards me, and that means that my scent isn't going to be carried across the field to where I think the hares will be. But now it's time to go quiet, stop talking and get in position, because when you're out photographing wildlife, noise, well, you know what it is. That doesn't help anyone. But just looking across, there is a beautiful red kite soaring right over the field. Oh, absolutely gorgeous. Right, so I've just come around the corner where I was hoping to head down a little bit and lay in wait for the hares. But as I got here, just cast my eye up, there's a group of fallow deer out in the field. There's probably about 10, 15 of them. But they can already smell me. They've already seen me and are looking at me. The wind direction that's travelling across the field, although great for the hares that will come from the other fields this way, probably won't be great for the fallow deer. But it does give me a bit of an indication of the locations they're coming to. It must be that this field's pretty good for grazing. I saw them here the other night when I was driving home. So it means that likelihood is if I come back over the next few days, maybe get into position a little earlier and, you know, the wind direction changes, this might be a spot to get a few images. You know, again, just building up that picture of your local subjects is really good in order to help you get those images in the long run. But what I'm going to do now is, because this spot here is just going to be rubbish for the hares and well too open, and I know that they like to move a bit further down this hedge line. It's also where I've got some of my remote cameras. I'm going to crawl along, see how far I can get without spooking the deer, and then set my camera up and lie and wait for the hares. You never know, the deer might come past, but I want to get in position ahead of time, because there's probably about only an hour or so till the hares usually start moving and their activity increases. So to get into position then, firstly I'm going to crawl to my location. You don't always have to do this, but in the area that I'm working this afternoon for the hares, it makes sense to. Keeping my profile as low as possible, I want to make sure that I'm checking the ground in front of me as I transition towards the area I'm going to photograph from. The deer that are in the field have already slightly moved off to the other side, so I'm pretty clear to get into position now. Just slowly making my way in and checking as I go as to not disturb anything. Once in position, getting set up quickly and efficiently is really important. You want to practice doing this so you can get it done as soon as possible. and get yourself into a nice location that's going to blend into the environment. I often find that being under a hedge line in the shadow can work really well. It means that there's a little less contrast between you and the environment, meaning that as your subjects approach you, you've blended in a lot more to your surroundings, just meaning that you don't stick out like a sore thumb. That's really going to shock them as they approach up the field. Now, of course, once you're in position, you've got to get the camera set up and ready to go. Pan across the environment in front of you, look to the areas that might work for different shots. I've got my tripod set up as low as possible. This is not only to be comfortable in my lying position, but also to give me the best look to the images. I want that camera set as low as possible so that the foregrounds and backgrounds blur out nicely. I'm using an f4 aperture here to really get nice foreground and background bokeh, but by having the lens as parallel as possible to the ground of my subjects, it helps really blur those areas out and make a much more easy transition between your subject and the environment around it. Now, setting up, I need to practice my settings, just checking the different areas of the field and the light conditions. I'm going to change this as I go through the afternoon, but to start with, I set around 2,000, 3,000ths of a second and have things set up and ready to go. As a photographer, I tend to use rear button autofocus when I'm working in the field with continuous autofocus on the whole time. Single point is my chosen focusing method, as it gives accuracy but also allows for compositional control. Now, the big part of working like this is the waiting game, constantly scanning up and down the field to work out if anything's approaching, constantly assessing those changes to the light and the conditions, and always being aware that your subject could appear at any time. So you've got to stay quiet and focused throughout the whole time. Watching through my binoculars, I need to make sure that the subjects aren't approaching from a different way and be ready to slightly move my position if something does turn up. If you spot it from a distance with your binoculars, you're going to have the time to react to it, change your position slightly and get those shots. Whereas if you're kind of not concentrating, looking at your phone or doing other things, you're not going to be aware of what's happening in front of you, and likely you're going to miss those situations. One thing that can be difficult is long hours lying down. It's good to kind of clench your legs and move around a little bit, small motions to keep you comfortable. Those long periods in the cold can certainly take their toll, but when a subject appears, you'll be immediately focused once again to get those shots. Just constantly watching, looking for any small movement, anything that looks slightly different from the norm that you've been staring at for hours can really lead you to finding your subject. Spotting a hare out in the field, firstly, often they're distant, far away from the position where I'm going to get a photograph, and so it's really important to just stay quiet and wait for them to approach. If they're feeding, well, that's going to be great for you because they're already comfortable in their position. They're not too worried about you, and it proves that you're already in a good location that's not causing any issues to the wildlife around you. Just watching through the viewfinder, you wait till they pick their heads up, move slightly, and that's when you're going to nail that shot. You might only have a fraction of a second to squeeze off 1 or 2 frames, so you've got to make the most of it and be ready. You could wait all afternoon for only 2 or 3 pictures, and so coming back time and time again is absolutely key. Here, that simple shot, that low angle gives a really nice simple portrait frame, but hours and hours can go past between seeing subjects, and you really have to be dedicated and focused to coming back time and time again. The cold, the wind, whatever happens, you just got to wait it out because eventually the subjects will turn up. Now, over lockdown, I've had the chance to vary my location, looking for subjects with more background contextual images, getting super close for those nice portraits when the grass was a little longer, catching them when they're eating, those ears up, looking for those slight interesting moments with nature. This one is one of my favourites with a white background, just something again a little bit different. Overcast situations can also be great. And of course, as the sun goes down, don't forget that you can still make images right till the last moment. When the sun goes down, you can underexpose and get something a little bit moody and interesting once again. Now, of course, with all wildlife photography, one of the big things is the fact that you're going to have to repeat the process over and over again. One day in the field certainly doesn't lead to a great portfolio of pictures, and coming back time after time is key if you want to keep building on that local project. With success over a few days, I came back to sit it out again, and although the conditions weren't great with a heavy overcast situation, I was really lucky to suddenly spot subjects. Not hares this time, but instead the fallow deer. The poo that I'd seen the earlier day had given them away, and spotting that little group of deer a couple of days before, I knew that they were in the area. The first thing I see is just a couple of ears just off in the distance before the deer slowly moved into the frame. Working and being as quiet as possible, I wanted to watch where they might move to first, again starting to understand the location and the shots that I can make. The first ones I tend to be going for is that of the clean portraits. The whole idea when I'm setting up any project or photographic shoot is to get something in the bag before then moving on to something a little more creative. Just slowly getting to position using the tripod. It's perfect to have this on a day like this. That extra support allowing me to drop my shutter speed a little bit more, down to 500th of a second, yet still get a really good frozen motion. The deer right out in the middle of the field are almost perfect in their location. The wind conditions keeping them from smelling me. I've got a good location up on the hedge line. Of course they know I'm there, they can still detect me, but they're comfortable in their position, walking round and feeding on the ground. It's a nice opportunity to get some shots. Firstly, working with some nice foreground bokeh. I'm squeezing off a high number of frames here. You know, you might only have 5 or 6 minutes to get shots, so you've really got to be quick and consistent making images. The first one of them just looking over the brow of the hill before they ran across the field. Capturing those sharp images with 1,000th of a second allows me to just, freeze a moment in time. After they'd run across, I'm already thinking about what's next. With those images in the bag, it's time to move on to something a little bit more creative. Slowing down my shutter speed for the second portion of the deer who are coming across, I could blur things out, make something again a little bit more interesting and different. For these images, I'm dropping the shutter speed down to around a 20th of a second, panning with them as they move across the field. I've closed down my aperture to f11 to f13 and then dropped my ISO all the way down to 100 to give me the correct exposure. Having been watching and taking multiple frames, it's time to switch it up again and look for something different. Having ideas ready in your mind is always key for this, and so I try to work with a panoramic style that I've been really enjoying over the last couple of years. Stitching multiple images together, I've got to shoot them in quick succession to make sure there's not too much movement. I'm still working with a slower shutter speed to add a little bit of motion, but then adding a second and third picture to then bring it together in post. Here, freezing a little group in the environment, I can really show more of the scale of what I'm looking at. This final picture, definitely my favourite from the afternoon. That whole Hertfordshire countryside in the background with that little group of deer. A perfect portrait and just that one image that's worth all that waiting. For me, it's not about hundreds of shots, but more about that single picture that you might work hours and hours for. That cup of tea well earned from a long day out in the field. So over the last few weeks working locally, we've had some great opportunities to get out and shoot with the telephoto lens. Fallow deer, hares, lots of great opportunities to make some images close to home. Using the telephoto to, get those portraits with the clean background, or even looking for the more environmental context shot by using that panoramic technique, slowing down the shutter speed and blurring things out. They're all great techniques to use, but with time and with using it very often, telephoto images can start to become a little bit boring and stagnated as a wildlife photographer. I think it's always a good idea to mix up your shooting style and try something new. Now this afternoon I'm heading out to check some of my camera traps. It's something that I got into a good 5 years ago now, and it's so much fun. Totally different way of shooting, using wide angle lenses, remote triggers and everything, setting things up and leaving them for weeks at a time. It can create a whole different style of image that's great to add into the portfolio and really expand what you can shoot and create as a wildlife photographer. Right, so here we are at one of my first cameras I'm going to be checking this afternoon. This is a pretty basic setup and one that I've been using for hares out in the field. I only set it up a couple of weeks ago, so we haven't had too much from it yet. But I thought it was a good one to walk past and show you that's kind of a basic system that I'm using. Now the whole idea about camera traps is the possibility to have a remote camera that you can leave in position for a certain type of shot, one that you might have pre-visualized well previous to taking it, that can allow you to get this kind of unique studio style shot of wildlife out in the field. Now, of course, leaving expensive DSLRs out in the field is risky, and it's certainly something not to do if you're not willing to lose the kit. But if you're going after those some images that are a little bit special, sometimes you've got to take some risks. And it really does come back to that idea of having those good private locations that you can work on to help keep your kit nice and safe and still get this different style of images. Now you'll see that my camera trap is all blended in. I've got my covers on the flash guns and the housing, and they're all made out of kind of durable plastic, waterproof, basically to just give it protection from the elements. When you're leaving a camera out for sometimes up to 6 months at a time, I've got to make sure that there's no water or moisture ingress into the camera that's going to break it. But there are a hell of a lot of things that will break the camera, and having used them all over the place, from coastal docks in Ireland to photograph otters to the rainforest and jaguars, you will lose the odd bit of kit if you're trying for this style of technique. It is that risk you take, but it's certainly worth it for the images, in my opinion. Now, what I'll first do before I sit down and walk you through the gear is just test and make sure that everything's working how I want it. This is the thing that I always do when I come back to a camera trap, because what should happen the moment I put my foot through the sensor, the beam line here, is that everything should fire with no problems whatsoever. And if that's the case, then we're good for this setup, and we can just check the images and then hopefully move on. And there we go. All 3 flashes firing, camera firing went off the moment I passed my foot through. Absolutely excellent. That means that the batteries haven't run out, and that, you know, I'm not having too many large system problems. But I'll jump down and see if we've got any pictures. Right, so the moment of truth. Now, I've already been lucky with this camera trap here. Basically, in the first couple of days, I got 2 pictures that were rather good. The first of a grey partridge coming out in front of me, and the second a hare early in the morning walking through. It's a bit of a shame that the morning was a little bit misty and there was a little bit of fog on the lens. That was a bit of a shame, but it's still really good to see that the location is working and that the animals are passing through this point. Now, opening up today, what are we going to see? Well, firstly, we should see my foot from a few seconds ago. Yep. And then, nope, there's my foot from the other day. That means we haven't had any images, but looking, we still have full charge on the battery, and the memory card is pretty, you know, nothing on it at all. And it might seem a little bit of a disappointment not to have any images, but the way I look at it is we haven't got any problems. Now, a lot of the time with camera traps, when you come back to them, there'll be some vegetation that's caused the camera to go off thousands of times. The light would have hit the sensor in a way that's caused it to go off thousands of times. There might have been some problem with the wire that it's been slightly out. It's kept the camera alive and suddenly the batteries are dead. The flashes might have gone off so many times, meaning that they're dead. But yet today when I come back, there's no pictures. That is a slight shame, but when I put my foot through, the whole lot went off exactly as it should do, meaning that this camera trap is perfectly ready to hopefully capture those pictures if things do move through. Now, whilst I'm laying here, I thought it was a good chance to just talk through kind of the simple basics of how I set things up. Now, when I'm doing any camera trap picture, for me, it's all about the aesthetic of this style of shooting. You don't want to just lob the camera somewhere where there might be some wildlife and you know stuff's going to come through. It's a lot more about finding scenes within nature that you want to create. These perfect little kind of areas where wildlife is crossing, and then you've got that, you know, contrast between your animal in the foreground and the background, showing that connection between your subject and its environment. That's what this is all about. It's not just about getting a picture of your subject wide angle with some flash. That isn't really how I tend to look at it. I look for areas that I think, oh God, that's a really beautiful little landscape. It'd be great to put a camera here and wait for months at a time until the animal that I want shows up perfectly in this spot. Now, once I've found a location like this, get down, get the camera in position. I'm using a D3300 with an 18 to 55mm kit lens, nothing super expensive, and some things that, you know, I'm not too worried about if I lose. I get the scene right, and often I'm working between like, you know, that 18mm and 24mm on a DX camera that is about, you know, 24 to 35mm in a full frame equivalent. I find that's a nice kind of reach to connect your subject, to have not too much distortion, have it like weirdly small with the background, but also give you enough space to get the composition as you want. Once I've got my camera in position, then I'm setting up my lighting. I'll put my primary light that is not this light, but is the one over there. And I'll just set that to where I want it first. I usually run that power at about a 16th, as there's a good balance between strength in order to give me the exposure on my subject, but also I know that I can get a reasonably fast recycle time. So I can get, you know, 5 or 6 shots in any sequence to make sure I get that perfect frame of the animal moving. The second one I'll put in is that fill light. I just half the power of my first light most of the time, just to give a little bit of lift to those shadows and balance it a little bit more. And then thirdly, well, the third light, my rim light or my backlight, it's just used to add a little bit of separation. It's not necessary all the time, but I do like to add them sometimes because it just gives a bit more of a 3D look to the images. I'll toy around with them, move them, get the positions right. And a lot of the time I'm zooming them in to give more directional kind of studio feel to the images. I'm not just flat bank lighting the whole lot. I want to really kind of create some emphasis on certain areas. And with all that set up and ready to go, my test shot done, often I'm setting the camera to about f11, 200th of a second to get that you know, sync speed right. And then once I know the shot's right, it's time to put the trigger in. I like to have my trigger so you know, it's a really obvious crossover of the exact point of where my subject should be. And then I need to make sure that it's not going to appear in the frame. Here, the trigger's out to the side. It's just out frame so that it's literally right on the edge of the frame. That means I know that it's about as close as I can get it to guarantee that it's going to be in the right spot without it being in the image. And the other one is off out of camera so you can't see it. I always want to make sure they're hidden because I think if you see the sensor, it really does ruin the kind of excitement of the picture. You can immediately go, nah, it's done with a camera trap sensor. So I always try to hide that. And of course, because you've got time when you're setting this thing up and you're taking time to do it all perfectly, you might as well get it right. And then of course, once it's set up, do a practice run, crawl through it, make sure everything's going off, and then I'll leave it for a few days before coming back to check it again. I always do that second check rather quickly, just to make sure that there are no glaring problems with, you know, vegetation just going through the triggers and triggering everything off. You know, the sunlight hitting at certain points. And if there are issues, I just kind of move things around and fix it again, and then come back 3 days later until it's all working perfectly. This setup seems to be working absolutely great, so I can leave it with no worries that we'll get those shots. And hopefully over the next few weeks, we'll get a few interesting images. You know, I've been using these techniques over the lockdown period on a variety of spots. I've got about 5 or 6 cameras that I put out in different places, and one that worked really well was right in the riverbed late last summer. The hares were coming down, crossing over, and it gave me a unique chance to get a really sweet looking image that was totally different to many I'd seen before. It took about, you know, 5 or so hours to set it up and get it right, a couple of days of tweaking and making sure it was perfect, and then left in position for a month or so, I finally got the image I was after. After I got one, I moved it a bit, and once you've got a location that's working, you can keep tweaking things and changing the image slightly, safe in the knowledge that the whole system's going to work and fire to get those shots, and you can really build that portfolio. But hopefully this one will do rather well over the next few weeks and I'll get a few more shots. But right now what we'll do is move off, and I'll go and show you one of my secret little projects that's really been making some cracking images. So as a final stop on my workshop this afternoon, I'm checking out another one of my cameras. This has been up and in position for a good couple of months now. It's a bit of a complex shot. It's one that's taken a hell of a lot of effort to get right. But when it comes to wildlife photography, a lot of the time, it's that time, effort that we've been talking about this whole video this afternoon that really makes those shots rather special. And this, for me, has produced certainly some of the images that I'm most proud of my lockdown shooting. Now, first things first with this camera, before I get started, I've got to get kitted up because, well, it's in a little bit more of a difficult situation than my other camera traps. It's going to require some extra equipment, but something that's been providing me a lot of fun whilst I've been in lockdown. Right, so as you can probably guess with the ropes, the harness and the helmet, I'm heading up a tree. for this one. Now, I spotted this location for a camera trap late last year and thought it'd be a great spot up in the canopy. I'm accessing with ropes and everything to be as safe as possible. I've done this a good few times now. And of course, this is by no means an instructional video for climbing trees. If you want to learn how to do that, go find a course, do it all properly, and stay safe out there. You know, when you're working in remote places, you want to make sure you're doing it right. But right now, I'm going to take you up there and show you what I think has certainly been my most fun, enjoyable, and largely successful camera traps of the last year. Right, so let's get ascending. Right then, so this is my camera trap that I've had up this tree for, well, it's about 7-8 months now. And what I'm going to do is just set my seat up so I'm a bit more comfortable, and then I'll run you through some of the shots and ways I move things to get a few different images. Right, so now I'm a little more comfortable, let's talk through the camera trap that is up this tree. Now, what I'm using is the same system as I had for the hares. I've got my Scout beam trigger, but then I'm using the awesome Scout wireless boxes that I've got. Basically, the receivers can transmit wirelessly to the box, fires the camera, and then wirelessly triggers the flashes. Super handy for a system like this when I'm up a tree, because of course I've got no wires, nothing to get in the way. I don't have to kind of mount things and trail wires around. And of course, when you're in quite a confined spot, when things will get in the way, I don't want to see any of the wires and stuff in the final image. Now, this box runs off its own batteries. They've got lithium-ion batteries that can power them for a long time. They run for about, a month or so on each charge. That's great for a long-term installment like this, but they are rather specialist and expensive, but it's something I've invested in over the years. And I thought it would be perfect for use on this camera trap in particular, because it's one that I've had up for a long time to slowly chip away at images. Now, when I was getting started making these images, firstly, the camera wasn't here. It was over where the actual kind of transmitter is now. It was looking out at this key point here where I'd seen the owl perch a couple of times. It looked out over the fields and it was a reasonably nice shot, but looking back now, it wasn't anything special. It was okay, it was fine, it was sharp, it was using a wide angle lens, a 10 to 20mm, lots of background and stuff, but it didn't have the interest, it didn't have the real feeling that I wanted from this shot. And so you've got to slowly tweak things. Over a matter of weeks and months, I slowly moved the camera position. Every day, getting up, tying my rope in a different position so I could hang out at a different location, moving the camera and saying, well, was that a little bit better, trying it, and then reshaping the flashes, moving them to the left, right, up, down, over the side, all different places to slowly build the lighting to something really interesting. I wanted a bit of rim lighting coming down this side, but then the light on this side, and I wanted it to look really kind of nighttime, dusky, really, the mood of the evening. To be honest, with time, it started to really come together. Through the winter months were probably some of my favorites. We had some really clear nights when the moon would come out, and that was when I got my best shot. I'd switched out the lens because although the 10 to 20 was nice, it was giving me a wide angle viewpoint, it wasn't giving me the gnarly effect that I wanted from this beautiful oak tree with all the bends and the turns in it. I wanted things to kind of really look like that. So I actually swapped out to my fisheye lens. My 10.5 Nikon fisheye lens is what I used, mounting it up with another box that I have, taking the front off so I could have it out and not be protruded. It meant that it was really open to the elements. I had to come up like twice a week to clean the front of the glass, make sure there wasn't any smears and raindrops, and a constant battle to keep it going, especially in the winter months. But with time, it started to work. I got a few shots where it was ruined by the elements. The barn owl was sat here and then there was just loads of raindrops over it. But after cleaning it, and one evening I got what for me is my lockdown shot that I'm super happy with. A barn owl sat in this tree on the gnarly oak with the moon lighting the tree in the background, lifting it up, and then my lights just giving enough fill to really show the location. It took months to get it, and it's one that I will be very, very happy to have in the portfolio for years and years to come. And it's exactly what I think is the essence of local wildlife photography. It's not necessarily a super rare species, the barn owl. They're found all over the country. But with time and effort and really trying to look for something different, you can make a really cool picture right close to home. So here it is. Well then guys, that's about it from me and today's workshop. I hope you found it useful to take a look at some of the projects that I've been shooting over the last year, a kind of behind the scenes of me out on location or working with camera traps. You know, there's so much untapped potential right on the doorstep, and as wildlife photographers, we should all be crafting our own little local projects to really develop our shooting, and also just to find unique images that are a little different to what we can produce at some of the more regular sites we're often visiting. If you'd like to ask any questions, be sure to drop them down in the comments below. I'll be happily answering those about gear, techniques, anything like that. Be sure to pop them down there. And if you'd like to see more from me, you can check out my YouTube, where I've got videos from the Okavango Delta to the Amazon rainforest, lots of stuff on camera trapping and getting out and photographing wildlife in the field. And of course, you can find me on Instagram as well for more of my images. But before I go, I just want to leave you with one final piece of advice, that when it comes to photography and developing, take on as much inspiration as you can and learn from as many places as possible. One thing that's great with Wex Photo Video that they're doing is all these wonderful masterclasses online from a load of talented people. I'm really looking forward to Tom Martin's upcoming course on creative filmmaking. It's going to be fantastic, something I'm really interested in, really looking forward to that. And there's just a whole host of really brilliant creators that have come together to produce some fantastic events for Wex that's certainly worth checking out. So be sure to look down in the description, check out the links, and go just soak up as much as you can. No matter what genre it is, it will really help you out. But that's it from me. So until the next one, guys, get out there, enjoy your wildlife photography, and go shoot some wonderful pictures. See ya.